You ever get a letter that smells like money trying to push you out of your own life? The paper felt thick between my fingers, heavier than it should have been, like it carried more than just ink and signatures. I could still smell the pine from the cabin walls behind me, mixed with that faint metallic scent of fresh printer toner as I read the bold red line again. Final notice. 72 hours to comply. The wind moved through the trees slow and steady, the same way it had when my dad first showed me how to sand these floorboards by hand, back when this place was just a dream nailed together with borrowed tools and stubborn pride. My name is Ethan Cole, and that cabin sitting on 2 acres of quiet Colorado hillside is the only thing my father ever left me that didn't come with debt or regret. 42 years he worked construction, 12-hour days, 6 days a week, just to build something that nobody could take from him. Or at least that's what we believed. The crunch of gravel pulled my attention back to the present. A white SUV rolled up the narrow dirt road like it owned the place, tires pressing into ground that had never asked for permission. Victoria Hale stepped out before the engine even died, heels clicking against the earth like she was walking on polished marble instead of raw land. She didn't look at the cabin. She looked at me. That kind of smile. Tight, controlled, practiced. "Mr. Cole," she said, voice smooth enough to pass for polite if you didn't listen too closely. "I trust you've received our notice." I held the paper up slightly, the edge trembling just enough to catch the light. 72 hours, I said. "That's generous." Her smile didn't move. "It's efficient." The air felt different standing there, like something invisible had shifted. Behind her, the hills rolled out the same way they always had, but the silence carried weight now, like it was waiting for something to break. "This structure," she continued, gesturing toward the cabin without really seeing it, "no longer aligns with community development standards. We're offering you a clean exit." Clean exit. Like this place was a mistake that needed correcting. Like my father's hands hadn't shaped every inch of it. Like the porch hadn't held us through winters when money ran thin and the only heat we had came from a stubborn wood stove and a refusal to quit. I could feel the paper crumpling slightly in my grip, fibers bending under pressure I wasn't ready to release. "And if I don't sell?" I asked. She tilted her head just enough to make it look sympathetic. "Then the association will proceed with enforcement. Legal, structural, and access restrictions." Translation: they'd choke it out piece by piece until I couldn't hold on anymore. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of dry leaves and something colder underneath. I looked past her for a second, toward the tree line where the property dipped just enough to hide the old boundary markers my dad used to check every spring. Funny thing about land, most people only see what's built on top of it. They don't think about what's underneath. I folded the notice once, clean and precise, and slipped it into my back pocket. "You said 72 hours, I said, meeting her eyes again. "Yeah," she replied. "That's right." I nodded slowly, feeling something settle into place, quiet and sharp. "Good," I said. "That should be enough." What she didn't know was that she'd just given me exactly the window I needed. The moment her SUV disappeared down the gravel road, the silence came rushing back in, thick and heavy, like the land itself was holding its breath. I stood there for a second longer than I needed to, listening to the wind slide across the roofline, the faint creak of wood that had settled into its place decades ago. Then I turned and pushed open the cabin door, the hinges giving that familiar low groan that always sounded like home. The air inside hit me instantly, warm pine, old dust, and something deeper, something permanent. I ran my hand along the wall as I walked in, fingers tracing the same grooves my dad used to joke about, said every mark had a story if you knew how to read it. The notice in my pocket felt heavier now, like it was trying to pull me down with it. I pulled it out and laid it flat on the kitchen table, right next to the old survey folder that had not been opened in years. The edges were worn, corners softened from time, but I knew exactly what was inside. My dad never threw anything away, especially not paper. "Paper is how they take things from you," he used to say, "and it is how you take it back." I opened the folder slowly, the faint crackle of old documents breaking the quiet. Deeds, permits, hand-drawn boundary sketches, and there it was, the map I remembered. Yellowed with age, lines drawn in ink that had bled slightly over time, but still sharp enough to tell the truth if you looked close. I leaned in, the wood of the table pressing into my palms as I studied the boundary line running along the lower ridge. Most people would have stopped there, right where the property ended on paper. But my dad never trusted surface lines. He always checked what ran beneath. My eyes followed the contour marks, tracing the slope, the drainage lines, the old easement notes scribbled in the margins. That is when I saw it again, the detail I had not thought about in years. A thin strip, barely noticeable unless you knew what to look for. It cut underneath the adjacent parcel, continuing just far enough to connect with a secondary access route that had never been developed. I could feel something shift in my chest, not panic, not anger, something sharper. Recognition. I reached for the newer documents I had picked up when I inherited the place, flipping through the updated county records. Clean lines, modern formatting, everything simplified for convenience. Too simplified. The newer map did not show the same depth, did not acknowledge the underlying rights that had never been formally terminated. They had built on top of assumptions, the kind that look solid until you apply pressure. I leaned back in the chair, the wood creaking under my weight as I let the pieces line up. Victoria thought this was about forcing a sale, about pressure, timelines, compliance. But she had made one mistake. She assumed I did not know what I owned. Outside, the wind picked up again, brushing against the cabin like a warning or maybe a reminder. 72 hours. That is what she gave me. I glanced at the clock on the wall, the second hand ticking steady and precise. I did not need all of it. Not even close. I grabbed my phone, the screen lighting up my hand as I scrolled to a number I had not called in years. A land attorney out of Denver. The kind of guy who did not talk much, but knew how to read between lines that most people never even saw. It rang twice before he picked up. "Ethan," he said, like he had been expecting me. I looked back down at the map, at that thin strip of forgotten ground that suddenly felt a lot more important than it ever had before. "I need to move fast," I said, "and I need to know exactly what still belongs to me." The line went quiet for half a second after I finished speaking, just enough time for the weight of what I was asking to settle on the other end. I could hear faint typing, the soft clack of keys echoing through the phone like distant footsteps in an empty room. "You still at the property?" he asked. His voice had that same steady tone I remembered, calm on the surface, but always measuring something underneath. I looked around the cabin, at the worn edges of the table, the window that framed the same stretch of hillside my dad used to point at when he talked about boundaries like they were living things. "Yeah," I said. "I am not going anywhere." Another pause. Longer this time. "Good," he replied. "Because if what you are looking at is what I think it is, you are about to make some people very uncomfortable." I leaned forward again, eyes locked on that thin strip running beneath the neighboring parcel. "Tell me I am not seeing things," I said. Papers shuffled on his end, the sound sharper now, more focused. "Your father filed a layered rights structure back in the late 1980s, he said. Surface ownership was separated from subsurface control in a very specific section. It is rare. Most people do not bother. Too complicated. Too expensive. I could feel my pulse steadying, not speeding up, just locking into rhythm like everything was starting to make sense. "How specific?" I asked. He exhaled slowly. "Specific enough that anything built above that line is still subject to the underlying rights holder. And Ethan, that rights holder is still you." The room seemed to tighten around that sentence, like the walls leaned in just enough to listen. I looked back at the newer documents again, at the clean lines that ignored what was underneath them. "They built without clearing it," I said. "They assumed it was gone." "They assumed no one would check," he corrected. "That is usually how these things happen." I stood up, the chair scraping softly against the floor, and walked over to the window. From there I could just barely see the roofline of the HOA office down the hill, sitting neat and polished like it belonged there. Like it had always belonged there. "What are my options?" I asked. There was no hesitation this time. "You can enforce access control. You can restrict use. And if you acquire the remaining adjacent access points, you can legally isolate that structure." The words landed clean. No drama. No exaggeration. Just facts. I let them sit for a second, watching the wind move across the grass between here and there. "How fast can we move?" I asked. A faint shift on the line, like he leaned closer to whatever documents he had in front of him. "If you are serious, we do not wait," he said. "You will need to move through an entity. Quietly. No direct connection to your name until everything is finalized." I nodded, even though he could not see it. I know someone who can set that up, I said. I just need you to confirm every inch of that line. Already pulling full records, he replied. Easements, access routes, any outstanding claims. I will map it down to the foot. I glanced at the clock again. Time was still moving, steady and indifferent. But it did not feel like pressure anymore. It felt like an advantage. They gave me 72 hours, I said. Then we finish this in 48, he answered. The call ended without anything else. No goodbyes. No wasted words. I stood there for a moment longer, phone still in my hand, looking out at that office, sitting comfortably on ground it did not fully understand. Then I slipped the phone into my pocket and grabbed my keys from the counter. The gravel outside crunched under my boots as I stepped out, the air sharper now, clearer. For the first time since that notice showed up, I was not reacting anymore. I was moving. And somewhere down that hill, Victoria Hale was still thinking this was her timeline. She just did not realize it had already shifted. I drove down the ridge road with the windows cracked just enough to let the cold air cut through the cabin smell, still clinging to my clothes. The engine humming steady under me while my mind ran faster than the speedometer. Every turn in that road was familiar, every dip and rise something I had driven 100 times, but today it felt different, sharper, like the land was showing me angles I had ignored before. My phone buzzed once in the cup holder, a message from the attorney, a single line with an address and a name. No explanation needed. I knew exactly what it meant. I pulled into a small gravel lot outside a one-story office building about 30 miles out. Nothing fancy, just a weathered sign and a door that stuck slightly when you opened it. Inside, the air smelled like old paper and fresh coffee, the kind of place where deals got done quietly and stayed that way. The man behind the desk did not look up right away, just finished signing something before setting his pen down with deliberate care. Ethan Cole, he said without asking, like my name had already been filed somewhere in his system. You are late by about 10 minutes. I checked my watch out of habit, even though I knew I was not. Traffic, I said. He gave a faint smile that did not quite reach his eyes. Of course. He slid a folder across the desk, thicker than I expected, tabs marking different sections with clean precision. The entity is ready, he said. Limited liability, no direct ties, clean funding path. You will be operating through this name moving forward. I opened the folder, the pages crisp, everything structured, controlled. It felt strange seeing something this important reduced to paperwork, but I knew better than to underestimate paper. Paper was leverage. And the parcels? I asked. He tapped one of the tabs. 2 adjacent access strips. Underutilized, overlooked, and currently available. One connects to the lower service road. The other runs directly along the perimeter of the association. Property. I felt that same shift again, that quiet click of pieces lining up. They never secured them, I said. No, he replied. They built assuming control would follow structure. It does not always work that way. I signed where he pointed, the pen moving steady across lines that would not look like much to anyone else, but I could feel the weight of it with every stroke. Each signature was a step closer to something they were not expecting. Once these close, he continued, you will control the only practical access routes to that building. Combined with your subsurface rights, it creates a very specific situation. I closed the folder slowly, the sound final in a way that felt right. How specific? I asked. He leaned back slightly, hands folding together like he had said this before in other contexts. Specific enough that any use of that structure becomes dependent on your permission. I nodded once, letting that settle in. Outside, a truck passed by on the road, tires humming against asphalt, the sound fading quickly into the distance. Everything out there was still moving like normal. Inside this room, things had already changed. I stood up, sliding the folder under my arm, the weight of it solid and real. Then let us make sure everything closes before their deadline runs out, I said. He gave a small nod. 48 hours, he replied. We will be done well before that. I stepped back out into the daylight, the air colder now, cleaner, like something had cleared. The sun was already starting its slow drop behind the hills, casting long shadows across the ground. I walked to my truck, paused for a second with my hand on the door, and looked back toward the direction of the property, toward that office sitting comfortably where it should not have been. They thought they had time on their side. They thought pressure would make me fold. But pressure works both ways. And now, for the first time since that notice showed up, I could feel it shifting in the other direction. By the time I got back to the cabin, the sky had shifted into that deep orange glow that only shows up right before the temperature drops hard, the kind of light that makes everything look calm even when it is not. I left the truck running for a second, listening to the engine idle, steady and predictable, before cutting it off and stepping out onto the gravel. The crunch under my boots sounded louder than usual, sharper, like every movement carried more weight now. Inside, the cabin felt different, not warmer or colder, just more focused, like every object in that room had suddenly become part of something larger. I set the folder down on the table next to the old survey map, the new and the old sitting side by side like they had been waiting for each other. My phone buzzed again, this time not a message, a call. Unknown number, but I already knew who it was. I let it ring once more before answering. Mr. Cole, Victoria's voice came through clean, controlled, but there was something under it now, something tighter than before. I wanted to confirm that you received the notice and understand the timeline. I glanced at the clock on the wall. Time still moving, steady as ever. I understand it perfectly, I said. A brief pause. Good, she replied. Because we have already initiated preliminary steps. Access adjustments, compliance reviews. We are not waiting until the deadline to move forward. I walked over to the window, looking out toward the slope where her office sat just out of direct sight. That sounds efficient, I said, keeping my voice level. It is necessary, she corrected. We are protecting community standards. The phrase hung in the air for a second, polished and empty at the same time. I could almost see her standing somewhere in that office, one hand resting on a desk that technically did not fully belong to her. You should consider taking the offer, she added. It would be the cleanest resolution for everyone involved. Clean again. That word kept coming back, like she believed saying it enough times would make it true. I let out a slow breath, watching it fog faintly against the glass. I appreciate the concern, I said, but I think I will use the time you gave me. Silence on the line, just long enough to register. 72 hours is not a suggestion, Mr. Cole, she said, the edge showing now, subtle. But real. It is a deadline. I smiled slightly, though she could not see it. Then we are on the same page, I replied. I ended the call before she could respond, the line cutting clean. For a moment, the only sound in the cabin was the faint ticking of the clock and the wind brushing along the exterior walls. Then I moved. I pulled the laptop from the shelf, powered it on, and started reviewing the documents the attorney had already sent over. Parcel numbers, transfer agreements, closing timelines. Everything was moving faster than most people would be comfortable with, but speed was the point now. Every hour that passed without them knowing what was happening worked in my favor. I picked up the old map again, laying it flat under the lamp, tracing that thin strip with my finger, feeling the slight texture of the paper beneath it. My dad had always said the smallest details were the ones people ignored, the ones they built over, the ones that came back later when nobody expected them to matter. Outside, a distant engine sound carried up the hill, faint but noticeable. I stepped out onto the porch, the cold air hitting me clean and sharp, and looked down toward the main road. A company truck was parked near the entrance, two workers standing beside it, pointing toward the direction of the cabin, talking like they were already planning changes. Access adjustments. She had not been bluffing. They were moving early, trying to box me in before I could respond. I leaned against the porch railing, the wood solid under my hands, and watched them for a few seconds longer than necessary. They thought this was pressure. They thought this would speed me up in the wrong direction. What they did not understand was that it only confirmed one thing. They were worried. And when people move early, when they push before the deadline, it means they are not as confident as they pretend to be. I stepped back inside, closing the door behind me with a quiet, final click, and went straight back to the table. The documents were ready. The structure was in place. All that was left now was execution. And I was already ahead of schedule. The next morning came in cold and quiet, the kind of silence that makes every small sound feel amplified, like the world is paying closer attention than usual. I woke up before the sun cleared the ridge, the cabin still wrapped in that dim blue light that settles in just before daybreak. The air inside was sharp enough to wake me fully without coffee, but I made it anyway, the smell filling the room as I spread the documents across the table again. Every page had a purpose now. Every line meant something. My phone lit up with a new email, subject line simple and direct, confirmed parcel availability. I opened it immediately, scanning through the details, coordinates, legal descriptions, access notes. The two strips were still clear. No competing bids. No sudden claims. Just quiet pieces of land sitting there, overlooked, waiting for someone who understood their value. I leaned back slightly, letting out a slow breath I did not realize I'd been holding. Timing was still on my side. I picked up the pen again, signing the preliminary acquisition documents, each stroke deliberate, controlled, no hesitation. This was the point where most people would second guess, wonder if they were moving too fast, but I knew better. Hesitation is what costs you ground. Outside, the first light finally broke over the hills, spilling across the trees and down into the valley where the HOA office sat, catching the edges of its roof just enough to make it stand out against the landscape. It looked polished, permanent, like it belonged. I finished the last signature and set the pen down, the small click against the wood louder than it should have been. Then my phone buzzed again. This time it was not an email. It was a notification from the county records office. Filing update. I opened it, eyes moving quickly across the confirmation lines. Entity name registered. Transaction pending. Escrow initiated. Everything was moving exactly the way it needed to. I stood up and walked to the window again, the mug warm in my hand, steam rising slowly into the cool air. Down near the road, more activity now. Another truck, different logo. People moving with purpose, measuring, pointing, talking. They were not waiting anymore. They were preparing to enforce. I watched them for a minute, long enough to understand their rhythm, their confidence. They still thought they were ahead. My phone rang before I could turn away, the attorney again. I answered immediately. "We are clear to proceed to closing on both parcels," he said without introduction. "Funds are in position. Title checks came back clean. No encumbrances that would block control." I could hear papers shifting on his end, faster now, more focused than before. "We move today," I said. "We move now," he corrected. "If we wait, we risk visibility. Right now, nobody is looking at those parcels. That changes the moment they realize what you are doing." I nodded, eyes still on the activity down the hill. "Then lock it in," I said. "All of it." There was a brief pause, not hesitation, just confirmation. "Understood," he replied. "You will have full control by end of day if everything clears on schedule." End of day? I glanced back at the clock. Not even noon yet. That gave me time. Not a lot, but enough. I ended the call and set the phone down, the cabin suddenly feeling smaller, like it was holding the weight of what was about to happen. I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside, the cold air hitting harder now, sharper, more alive. The gravel crunched under my boots as I walked a few steps away from the cabin, turning to look at it fully for a moment. Every board, every window, every inch of it still mine. Still standing. Still exactly where it had always been. Then I looked past it, down toward that office again, toward the people who believed they were about to take something from me. They had started this by giving me a deadline. What they did not understand was that deadlines worked both ways. And theirs was coming faster than they thought. By early afternoon, the light had shifted again, sharper now, less forgiving, casting hard lines across the hillside like the land itself was drawing boundaries in plain sight. I was halfway down the slope when my phone buzzed in my pocket, the vibration quick and insistent. I pulled it out without stopping, eyes scanning the notification before I even slowed my steps. Final confirmation, title transfer. Complete. For a second, everything went quiet. Not the wind, not the distant sound of engines, just something inside me settling into place with a precision that felt almost mechanical. It was done. I stopped where the gravel path met the lower ridge, looking straight toward the HOA office. From this angle, it looked even more established, clean lines, fresh paint, glass catching the sun like it had nothing to hide. But I knew better now. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the printed confirmation the attorney had sent over, the paper still warm from the printer earlier that day. My name was not on it. Not directly. Just the entity. Clean. Separate. Controlled. I folded it once and slipped it back, then turned and walked the rest of the way down to the access road. The workers were still there, same trucks, same measured movements, marking points along the edge of the property like they were preparing to redraw something that had already been decided. One of them looked up as I approached, clipboard in hand. "Area is restricted for development prep," he said, not aggressive, just rehearsed. "You will need to keep clear of this section." I nodded slowly, taking in the stakes they had placed, the bright tape tied to each one, fluttering lightly in the breeze. Understood, I said. Then I stepped just past the line he indicated and stopped. His expression shifted slightly, not alarmed, just confused. Sir, I just said this section is restricted, he added, a little firmer now. I reached into my jacket again, this time pulling out a different document, the one that mattered in this moment. I held it up just enough for him to see the seal at the bottom, the county mark clear and unmistakable. This section, I said evenly, is under new ownership as of about 15 minutes ago. The wind moved through again, catching the edges of the paper, making it flutter just enough to draw attention. He glanced down at it, then back at me, trying to process something that did not match what he had been told earlier that day. I was not informed of any transfer, he said. That makes sense, I replied. It just happened. I stepped back slightly, giving him space, not pushing, just standing firm. You might want to check with whoever sent you out here, I added. He hesitated for a moment, then nodded, already reaching for his phone, stepping aside to make the call. I turned away before he could finish, walking slowly along the edge of the newly marked line, following it with my eyes as it curved toward the lower access point. Every step felt deliberate now, not rushed, not uncertain. Controlled. Down the road, I could see the HOA office more clearly, the front entrance facing outward, open, accessible, welcoming in a way that now felt temporary. I pulled out my phone and dialed the attorney again. He picked up immediately. It is done, I said. Both parcels are secured. Good, he replied. Then you are in position. I looked at the road leading up to that office, the one that now ran directly through land I controlled. Not just in position, I said quietly. They are standing on it. There was a brief pause, then a low exhale on the other end. Not surprise, just recognition. Then the next move is yours, he said. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket. Eyes still on that building, that clean, confident structure that had no idea the ground beneath it had already shifted. They had started this with pressure, with timelines, with certainty. Now it was my turn to decide how it ended. By the time the sun dipped low enough to throw long shadows across the road, everything was in place, not rushed, not chaotic, just quiet pieces settling exactly where they needed to be. I stood near the lower access point, boots planted on gravel that now legally answered to me, watching as a flatbed truck rolled in behind me carrying sections of temporary steel fencing stacked neatly in rows. The driver stepped out, glanced at the coordinates on his clipboard, then at me. This is the spot, he asked. I nodded once. Right along this line, I said, pointing to the markers I had already adjusted earlier. Follow it clean. No gaps. He did not ask questions. People like him rarely do when the paperwork checks out. Within minutes, the low hum of equipment filled the air, steady and controlled, metal posts being set into the ground with measured precision, each one spaced exactly, each one locking into place like part of a system that had already been decided long before it showed up. Down the road, I could see movement near the HOA office, more activity now, people coming in and out, phones in hands, heads turning more often than before. They were starting to notice. The sound carried, not loud, but consistent enough to draw attention. I walked along the forming line of fence, running my hand lightly along one of the steel posts as it settled into position, feeling the vibration travel through it, solid, final. Every few feet, a sign went up, white background, bold black letters, simple and direct, private property, authorized access only. No emotion, no explanation, just fact. My phone buzzed again, and this time I did not need to check who it was. I answered before the second ring. What are you doing? Victoria's voice came through, no polish this time. Just controlled urgency pressed tight under every word. I looked down the road toward her office, watching as one of her staff stepped outside, shielding their eyes against the sun, trying to see what was happening. Using my property, I said evenly. There was a pause, not confusion, not yet, just resistance. That access road services a community structure, she said. You cannot restrict it without notice. I let my eyes move across the fence line again, watching as another section locked into place, the metallic click carrying clearly in the open air. I believe the notice period is 72 hours, I replied. Silence. Longer this time. The kind that tells you someone is recalculating. That does not apply here, she said finally, but the certainty was thinner now. We have established use. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the final document, unfolding it slowly, not because I needed to read it again, but because the act itself mattered. Use does not override ownership, I said. And as of this afternoon, this land is no longer available for unrestricted access. Down by the office, I could see more people gathering now, pointing toward the road, the realization starting to spread in pieces. One of the workers near me paused, glancing over his shoulder as if to confirm what he was seeing was real. You are creating a problem, Victoria said, her voice tightening further. I watched as the final section of fence was positioned across the main approach, the last open stretch closing in a straight, clean line. No, I said quietly. I am defining one. The last post went in with a firm, solid thud, the sound echoing just enough to carry. The driver stepped back, wiping his hands, looking to me for confirmation. I gave a small nod. Done. I stepped back a few feet, taking in the full line now, uninterrupted, controlled, exactly where it needed to be. Down the road, the front entrance of that office was still visible, still open, but no longer connected the way it had been that morning. I brought the phone back to my ear. You gave me a timeline, I said. I just used it more efficiently. The line went quiet again, but this time there was no immediate response. No correction, just the sound of someone on the other end finally understanding that the ground beneath them had already shifted. The sun was almost gone by the time everything settled, the last light stretching thin across the ridge and catching on the steel fence like a line drawn in ink that could not be erased. The air had gone colder, sharper, carrying that quiet stillness that only shows up after something final has already happened. I stood a few feet back from the barrier, hands resting lightly at my sides, watching as the activity near the office slowed from urgency to confusion, then from confusion to something quieter, something heavier. People were no longer pointing. They were standing still, looking at maps, phones pressed to ears, voices lower now, more measured. The front entrance was still there, still facing the road the same way it had that morning, but the connection was gone. Not broken, not damaged, just removed. My phone remained silent for a long moment, longer than I expected, like even that line of communication needed time to catch up with what had just shifted. When it finally rang again, I answered without looking at the screen. We need to talk, Victoria said. No edge this time. No. Rehearsed control. Just direct. I kept my eyes on the office, on the glass reflecting the last of the light. We are talking, I replied. A breath on the other end. Slower. Measured. This situation is not sustainable, she said. That building serves the entire community. There are legal considerations you are ignoring. I let that sit for a second, not rushing to answer, not reacting. The wind moved again, brushing along the fence, a soft metallic hum running through it. I am not ignoring anything, I said. I am enforcing what is already there. Silence. Then, quieter, what do you want? That question landed differently than everything else she had said. No assumptions. No directives. Just a gap she needed filled. I looked down at the gravel near my boots, then back up at the office. I want my property left alone, I said. No more notices. No more access changes. No more attempts to push me out of something that was never yours to control. The line stayed quiet for a moment. Then I heard movement on her end, maybe pacing, maybe just thinking. If we agree to that, she said slowly, you will restore access? I glanced at the fence again, at the clean line it created, the clarity of it. Access can be arranged, I said. With terms. Written. Filed. Clear. Another pause, shorter this time. Send them, she said. We will review. I nodded once, even though she could not see it. You will have them tonight. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket, the weight of it lighter now, like the pressure had shifted fully off me and onto something else. I took one last look at the office, at the people inside who were now standing on ground they finally understood they did not control, and then I turned and started back up the slope toward the cabin. The gravel crunched under my boots, steady and familiar, each step carrying less tension than the last. By the time I reached the porch, the sky had gone fully dark, the first stars just starting to show through. I paused at the door, hand resting on the wood, feeling the same solid resistance it had always had. Nothing about this place had changed. Not really. It was still mine. It had always been mine. The difference now was that everyone else finally understood it too. I pushed the door open, stepped inside, and let it close behind me with a quiet, final sound that echoed just enough to matter. Justice is not loud. It does not rush. It waits, it builds, and when it moves, it does not need to announce itself. It just becomes undeniable.